You wake to sunlight filtering through palm fronds. The air is thick, warm, dense with moisture. Around you, tall grass rises higher than your head, swaying in the tropical breeze. The stalks are thick, segmented, bamboo-like. And if you were to split one open, if you were to press your teeth against the fibrous flesh inside, you would taste something extraordinary. Something sweet. Not the fleeting sweetness of fruit, not the mild pleasure of honey, but a clean, pure, crystalline sweetness that seems to exist beyond nature. This is sugarcane, and in your hands it holds the future, a future of empires and oceans crossed, of fortunes made and lives broken, of pleasure refined and desire unleashed. But right now, in this quiet moment, it is just a plant, just a stalk of grass, and you do not yet know what it will become. The first taste, the sweetness begins as a secret, not hidden but simply unnoticed by most of the world. In the warm river valleys of New Guinea, perhaps 10,000 years ago, someone discovers that this particular grass, this wild ancestor of sugarcane, tastes different from all others. They chew the stalk, they feel the juice coat their tongue, and something in their mind lights up. This is not just food, this is pleasure. First, it is casual, a snack while working in the fields, a treat for children, a way to pass the time. But slowly, carefully, people begin to notice which plants taste sweetest, which stalks are thickest, which ones grow tallest, and they begin to select, to save the seeds of the best plants, to replant them, to tend them. You are not farming for survival now. You are farming for joy, and that changes everything. Sugarcane spreads slowly, carried by migrating peoples across the Pacific into Southeast Asia, into India. Wherever it grows, it becomes treasured. But it is still rare, still difficult. The stalks must be crushed, the juice extracted, and even then, the sweetness is fleeting. It ferments quickly, spoils in the heat. To preserve it, to concentrate it, requires something more. Requires heat, requires patience, requires a kind of alchemy that will take centuries to perfect. But even in these early days, you sense the potential, because sweetness is not just taste. It is comfort, it is childhood, it is celebration, it is a small defiance against the bitterness of life. And everyone who tastes it wants more. The first attempts to preserve sugar are crude. You boil the juice in clay pots over open flames. The liquid thickens, darkens, becomes syrup. It is sticky, unrefined, full of molasses and impurities. But it is sweet, and it lasts. You can store it in sealed containers, carry it on journeys, trade it for other goods. Sugar begins its transformation from plant to product. And as it does, something shifts in human culture. Because now you have discovered that pleasure can be manufactured. That sweetness is not just a gift of nature to be accepted when found. Can be created, controlled, multiplied. You have taken the random joy of finding ripe fruit and turned it into an industry. And once that door opens, it never closes. The merchant's discovery. Sugar moves along ancient trade routes like a rumor, carried by merchants from India into Persia, from Persia into Arabia, from Arabia into the Mediterranean world. It arrives in small quantities, wrapped in cloth, sealed in jars, precious as gemstones. Because that is what it is, a luxury beyond reach. The Greeks encounter it first as curiosity. They call it sweet salt. This strange substance that looks like crystals but tastes like concentrated sunshine. The Romans know it only as medicine, a rare remedy imported at great cost for the wealthy and infirm. It is too expensive to eat casually, too rare to waste on mere pleasure. But those who taste it never forget. In Persia, the refinement process advances. Skilled workers learn to clarify the juice, removing impurities, boiling it multiple times until crystals begin to form. True sugar emerges. Not syrup, not molasses, but hard, white, shelf-stable crystals. This is the breakthrough, because now sugar can travel, can wait, can be measured, sold, taxed. It becomes a commodity, and commodities build empires. The Arabs perfect the process further. They established the first true sugar plantations in the Levant, in Egypt, in North Africa. They build mills powered by oxen and water wheels to crush the cane. They construct refineries with multiple boiling rooms, each hotter than the last, each stage removing more impurities. The crystals they produce are still brown, still rough, but they are recognizable. They are sugar as the world will come to know it. And the world wants it. Oh, how the world wants it. European crusaders returning from the Holy Land bring back tales of this miraculous substance. They have tasted it in the markets of Damascus, in the gardens of Jerusalem. They have seen how it transforms simple foods into delicacies, how a spoonful can change bread into cake, water into nectar. They return home hungry for more. But Europe cannot grow sugarcane. The climate is wrong. The knowledge is absent. And so they must trade, must pay. And the price is extraordinary. In medieval Europe, sugar is sold by the pinch, used in the kitchens of kings and nobles. A single pound costs what a laborer might earn in a week. It is medicine first, luxury second, used to coat bitter pills, to sweeten harsh remedies, to impress guests at royal banquets. It is displayed in sculptural forms, molded into castles and animals, not to be eaten but to be admired. A demonstration of wealth so extreme it borders on madness. But even as the rich hoard it, even as they lock it away in special boxes with tiny keys, the desire spreads. Because desire does not respect class boundaries. The merchant who delivers sugar to the palace kitchen steals a taste. The servant who sets the table for the banquet licks a finger. The child who watches through a window dreams of the day they might afford just a spoonful. Sugar becomes aspiration. It becomes the taste of a better life. And that makes it dangerous. Because when enough people want something badly enough, the world reshapes itself to provide it. No matter the cost. The island experiments. The Europeans begin to scheme. If they cannot grow sugar at home, they will grow it elsewhere. On conquered lands. In climates warm enough for cane. The Spanish and Portuguese lead the way, carrying sugarcane to the Atlantic islands, to Madeira, to the Canaries, to São Tomé. Small experiments at first, just a few fields, a modest mill, but the soil is rich, the sun is reliable, and the cane grows tall. The first island harvests are small but profitable, very profitable, and that attracts attention. More investors, more land cleared, more mills constructed. The experiments scale up. Entire islands are transformed. Forests are cut down to make room for cane fields. Native plants are ripped out. The landscape becomes a monoculture, a sea of green stalks swaying in unison, beautiful in its uniformity, terrifying in its implications. Because this kind of agriculture is different. This is not subsistence farming, not careful tending of diverse crops to feed a family through the seasons. This is industrial-scale cultivation for export, for profit, and it requires something that Europe has in short supply: labor, massive amounts of labor. The work of sugarcane is brutal. The stalks must be cut by hand, close to the ground where the sweetness concentrates. The fields are hot, humid, infested with insects. The sharp leaves slice skin. The work is constant during harvest season, dawn until long after dark, because cut cane spoils quickly. It must be crushed within hours, or the sugar content drops. So the work never stops. At first, the Portuguese used local laborers, then indentured servants from Europe. But there are never enough, and those who can flee do. The work is simply too hard, too dangerous, too unrewarding, and so the plantation owners look elsewhere. They look to Africa. The slave trade, already established for other goods, finds a new and terrible purpose. Ships begin carrying human cargo across the Atlantic. Men, women, children torn from their homes and brought in chains to these island plantations, forced to work in conditions that break bodies and spirits. The sugar industry does not invent slavery, but it transforms it, makes it systematic, industrial, necessary, the owners claim, for the enterprise to function. The sweet crystals that delight European tongues are produced by the most bitter suffering imaginable, and the profits are staggering. Sugar sells for prices that make plantation owners rich beyond dreams. They build grand houses, commission art, marry into nobility. The wealth flows back to Europe, funding further expeditions, further conquests. And the plantation model spreads. Because if it works on small islands, imagine what it could do on a continent. The European powers look west, across the Atlantic, to the vast new world recently encountered, to lands with endless space and climates perfectly suited for sugarcane. The islands were just experiments, just a proof of concept. Now comes the real transformation, the Caribbean transformation. The Caribbean becomes a factory. That is the only word that fits. Island after island is converted from diverse ecosystems into sugar-producing machines. The Spanish, Portuguese, English, French, Dutch, they all compete for territory. Not for the land itself, but for what can be forced to grow on it. Jamaica, Barbados, Saint-Domingue, Cuba, Martinique, each island follows the same pattern. First comes conquest. The indigenous peoples are displaced, enslaved, or killed by disease and violence. Then comes deforestation. The native forests, rich with mahogany and countless other species, are cut down. The wood is used for building, for fuel, for export, but mostly it is just cleared, removed, made space for cane. Then come the fields, row after row after row of sugarcane, planted precisely, tended obsessively, the entire landscape remade into a grid. And at the center of each plantation, the mill, the crushing wheels, powered by wind or water or animals or humans, the boiling houses with their massive copper vats, their roaring fires, the curing sheds where the crystals are dried and separated from molasses, The whole operation runs like clockwork, or tries to, because at every stage there is human suffering. The enslaved workers who plant and cut and haul the cane, who feed the mills and tend the fires, who work through sickness and injury, who are beaten for slowness, for mistakes, for the simple act of being human in a system that treats them as tools. The mortality rate is obscene. Many do not survive their first year. Children are born into slavery, grow into it, die in it. Entire lives consumed by the production of sweetness. The plantation owners, most of whom live in Europe and never see the source of their wealth, justify the system with elaborate rationalizations. They are civilizing. They are Christianizing. They are bringing order to chaos. They insist doing good. But the truth is simpler and darker. They are extracting profit, turning human lives into sugar crystals. And the system works in the cold arithmetic of economics. Sugar production skyrockets. Prices begin to drop. What was once affordable only to royalty becomes accessible to the merchant class, then to the working class. Sugar enters the daily life of Europe. It sweetens tea and coffee, those other colonial products now flooding European markets, preserves fruits, decorates cakes, makes medicine palatable. It becomes, slowly but inevitably, a necessity. The British in particular build their empire on it. By the 18th century, sugar is Britain's most valuable import. The wealth it generates funds the Royal Navy, which protects the shipping lanes, which conquers more territory, which secures more plantations. A self-reinforcing cycle of sweetness and violence. The famous triangular trade emerges. Ships leave Europe loaded with manufactured goods, textiles, weapons, rum. They sail to Africa and trade these goods for enslaved people. Then they cross the Atlantic in the horrific Middle Passage, where many die in the cramped, disease-ridden holds. Those who survive are sold in the Caribbean. The ships are loaded with sugar, molasses, rum, and sail back to Europe. 3 legs, 3 continents, millions of lives destroyed to satisfy a growing hunger for sweetness. And still the demand increases. The refining revolution. Sugar arrives in European ports as raw brown crystals, sticky with molasses, rough in texture. It is sweet, yes, but it is not yet perfect, not yet pure. And purity, in the minds of European refiners, is everything. They see the brown color as imperfection, as contamination. They want sugar to be white, colorless, clean. And so they develop refineries, massive industrial operations in cities like London, Amsterdam, Hamburg. The brown sugar is dissolved in water, mixed with lime to remove impurities, filtered through charcoal, often made from animal bones, which whitens the crystals, boiled again, crystallized again, each step removing color, removing flavor, removing anything that is not pure sucrose. The result is white sugar, and it is a revelation, because white sugar is neutral. It has no flavor of its own beyond sweetness. It does not change the color of foods. It dissolves cleanly in liquids. It is the perfect ingredient, a blank canvas for bakers and confectioners, and its whiteness carries symbolic weight. In an age obsessed with purity, cleanliness, and racial hierarchies, white sugar becomes associated with refinement in every sense. The whiter the sugar, the wealthier the household. Brown sugar, once the only option, is now seen as inferior, as something for the poor, for those who cannot afford better. The color of sugar becomes a status symbol, and the irony is bitter. This white sugar, this symbol of purity and civilization, is produced through a system of racial slavery and exploitation. The whiteness is achieved through violence, but that truth is carefully hidden. Consumers in Europe do not see the plantations, do not see the enslaved workers, do not see the brutality. They see only the clean white crystals in their pantries, and they consume without question. The refineries themselves become industrial marvels. Multi-story buildings filled with vats and pipes and machinery. Workers, often poorly paid laborers including children, tend the boiling sugar. The heat is tremendous. The air thick with steam and sweetness. Accidents are common. Burns, falls, injuries from the machinery. But the work continues because the demand is insatiable. Sugar consumption in Britain alone increases tenfold in the 18th century. What was once a luxury is now a staple. The average person consumes pounds of it each year, and that average is rising. Sugar is added to everything, to tea, which is now the national drink, to porridge, to bread, to stews, preserves jams and jellies, sweetens medicine, makes life just a little more bearable for working people whose lives are hard, whose labor is endless, whose pleasures are few. And here is where sugar reveals its true power. It is not just sweetness. It is energy, pure, rapid energy. A spoonful of sugar delivers calories faster than almost any other food. For workers in factories, for laborers in mines, for anyone engaged in physical toil, sugar becomes fuel. Keeps them working when exhaustion sets in. Provides a burst of energy in the middle of a long shift. Employers begin to provide it, to include it in rations, not out of generosity, but out of calculation. Sugared tea keeps workers productive, keeps them compliant, keeps them alive just long enough to continue producing. Sugar becomes a tool of industrial control, and the workers, even as they are exploited, crave it, because it makes the unbearable slightly more bearable. The colonial web. Sugar connects the world in ways never seen before. It creates trade networks that span oceans, supply chains that link continents, economic dependencies that shape the fates of nations. The Caribbean islands produce the raw sugar. Britain and other European powers refine it. Africa provides the enslaved labor, and the profits flow back to a small number of wealthy families and corporations who control the trade. These are not nations acting. These are private companies, given charters by their governments, granted monopolies, allowed to operate with impunity. The British East India Company, the Dutch West India Company, the Portuguese Royal African Company. They are among the first multinational corporations, and they are built on sugar, on slavery, on the systematic exploitation of entire populations. The wealth they generate is almost incomprehensible. Plantation owners become among the richest people in the world. They buy estates in England, seats in Parliament. They lobby for laws that protect their interests, that keep the slave trade legal, that maintain high tariffs on competing sugar sources. They are political power, and they use that power ruthlessly. When abolitionists begin to speak against slavery, the sugar lobby fights back. They fund newspapers. commissioned studies claiming that enslaved people are better off on plantations than in Africa, that slavery is economically necessary, that abolition would destroy Britain's economy. They delay, they obstruct, they lie, because their fortunes depend on the system continuing. And for decades it does. But the system also creates resistance. The enslaved people on the plantations do not accept their fate passively. They resist in countless ways. They work slowly. They break tools. They feign illness. They run away, fleeing into mountains and forests, forming communities of escaped slaves called Maroons. And sometimes they rebel. The Haitian Revolution, beginning in 1791, is the most successful slave revolt in history. The enslaved people of Saint-Domingue, the richest sugar colony in the world, rise up. They fight against French colonial forces, against British and Spanish invaders, against Napoleon's armies, and they win. In 1804, Haiti becomes an independent nation, the first black republic, the only nation founded by formerly enslaved people. The revolution terrifies the sugar powers. If it can happen in Haiti, it can happen anywhere. Security on plantations tightens. Punishments become more severe, but the damage is done. The idea of abolition, once considered radical, gains momentum. Religious groups, particularly Quakers, lead the charge. They organize boycotts of sugar produced by enslaved labor. Millions of people in Britain stop buying it. They seek out alternatives, sugar from India produced by paid workers, even though it is more expensive. The boycott does not end slavery, but it changes the conversation. It makes the connection visible. Your sweetness comes from suffering, and more people begin to feel the weight of that truth. The abolitionist victory. The abolition movement builds slowly, then all at once. In Britain, after decades of campaigning, the slave trade is abolished in 1807. The importation of enslaved people ends. But slavery itself continues in the colonies for another generation. The plantation owners fight every step of the way. They demand compensation. They claim economic ruin. They predict that British power will collapse without sugar. And the government listens. In 1833, slavery is finally abolished in most British territories. But the enslaved people receive nothing. Instead, the government pays the plantation owners £20 million, an enormous sum, to compensate them for the loss of their property, the property being human beings. The debt from this payment is not fully repaid until 2015. British taxpayers, for nearly 2 centuries, are paying for the ending of slavery, paying the enslavers. It is an injustice layered upon injustice. But still, it is progress. Enslaved people in the British Caribbean are freed. Though their freedom is constrained, they must work as apprentices for years. They are denied land, denied education, denied the resources to build independent lives. Many end up working on the same plantations for wages so low they barely survive. The sugar economy continues, but now with paid labor, or at least nominally paid. Other nations follow Britain's example, slowly. France abolishes slavery in 1848. The Dutch in 1863. The Spanish hold out longer, but eventually they too are forced to change. In the United States, the Civil War ends slavery in 1865, though sugar is a smaller part of the American economy. The British focus was molasses and rum. The institution of slavery, so central to sugar production for centuries, is finally officially ended. But the legacy remains. The wealth generated by slavery does not disappear. It is invested. It builds banks, factories, railways. It funds the Industrial Revolution. Many of Britain's grandest institutions, its universities, its museums, its country estates, are built on sugar money, built on slavery, and the formerly enslaved receive none of it. Their labor, their lives, their suffering enriches others. Their descendants inherit poverty. The wound does not heal. It festers across generations. And meanwhile, sugar consumption does not decline. If anything, it increases, because new sources are found, new methods developed. The age of plantation slavery ends, but the age of industrial sugar is just beginning. The beet revolution. Sugar, for all of human history, came from one source: sugarcane, a tropical plant, a colonial product. But in the early 19th century, European scientists make a discovery. They find that another plant, a humble root vegetable called the sugar beet, also contains sucrose. Not as much as cane, but enough. And critically, beets can be grown in temperate climates. In Europe itself, no longer do European nations need to depend on colonies, on ships that can be raided, on plantations vulnerable to revolt. They can grow sugar at home. The discovery is revolutionary. Napoleon, locked in a continental blockade with Britain, promotes beet sugar aggressively. He offers subsidies. He commissions research. He wants France to be self-sufficient. And it works. By the mid-19th century, beet sugar is a significant industry. Germany, France, Russia, they all cultivate vast fields of beets. They build processing plants. And they produce sugar that is nearly identical to cane sugar at a fraction of the cost. The Caribbean planters panic. Their monopoly is broken. The price of sugar, which they controlled for so long, begins to fall. They lobby their governments desperately. They demand tariffs to protect cane sugar. They spread rumors that beet sugar is inferior, unhealthy. But the market does not care. Beet sugar is cheaper, and consumers want cheap. The balance of power shifts. Sugar production moves from the tropical colonies to the European heartland. The plantations decline. Some are abandoned. Others struggle on with reduced profits. The formerly enslaved workers, now paid laborers, see their wages drop further. Many migrate seeking work elsewhere, in cities, in other colonies in America. The sugar economy that once dominated the Caribbean becomes a shadow of itself. But global sugar consumption continues to rise, because now sugar is truly cheap. Cheap enough for everyone. Cheap enough to be used not just in homes but in factories, to sweeten condensed milk, to preserve fruits on an industrial scale, to make candy, chocolate, soft drinks. Sugar becomes an ingredient in nearly everything, and the health consequences begin to appear, but they are subtle at first. Tooth decay increases. Obesity begins to rise among those who can afford abundant food. Diabetes, once rare, becomes more common. But these are slow changes, spread across decades, and they are ignored because sugar is delicious, because it makes life sweeter, because by now it is woven into the fabric of daily life. Removing it is unthinkable. the industrial sweetening. The 20th century transforms sugar from ingredient to infrastructure. Food companies discover that sugar does more than sweeten. Preserves. It adds bulk. It improves texture. It enhances flavor even in savory foods. And it is cheap. So cheap that adding it costs almost nothing. And it makes food more appealing, more addictive. Companies begin adding sugar to bread, to crackers, to sauces, to soups, to foods where no one expects it, where no one thinks to look for it. The average person's sugar consumption, which was already high, skyrockets. In America, by the late 20th century, the average person consumes over 100 pounds of sugar per year, not through cakes and candy alone, but through everyday foods. Breakfast cereals loaded with sugar, ketchup with more sugar than ice cream, yogurt marketed as healthy but sweetened like dessert. The soft drink industry is born and grows into a global giant. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, these brands become some of the most recognized in the world. And they are sugar delivery systems. A single can contains more sugar than the daily recommended limit. But they are marketed as refreshing, as fun, as part of a good life. Children grow up drinking them. Adults consume them by the gallon. And the sugar industry, now including both cane and beet producers, grows enormously wealthy. They lobby governments. They fund research. They fight regulation. When scientists begin to warn about the health effects of excessive sugar consumption, the industry attacks them. Funds contrary studies. Sows doubt. The playbook is similar to that used by the tobacco industry. Deny, delay, confuse, keep the product flowing. And it works. For decades, dietary guidelines focus on fat as the enemy. Sugar is barely mentioned. Low-fat foods become popular, and to make them taste good, manufacturers add sugar, sometimes massive amounts. People think they are eating healthily, but they are consuming more sugar than ever. Obesity rates climb. Diabetes becomes an epidemic. Heart disease, linked partly to excessive sugar consumption, remains a leading cause of death. But the connection is obscured, hidden in the complexity of nutrition science, in the millions spent on marketing, in the simple fact that sugar tastes so good, that it provides comfort, that removing it from your diet feels like punishment. The modern food system is built on sugar, and changing it seems impossible. The health reckoning. The evidence accumulates slowly. Study after study shows the dangers. Excessive sugar consumption is linked to obesity, to type 2 diabetes, to heart disease, to fatty liver disease, to certain cancers, to cognitive decline. The mechanisms become clear. Sugar, especially in liquid form, causes rapid spikes in blood glucose. The body responds with insulin. Over time, cells become resistant to insulin. The pancreas struggles. Metabolism breaks down. Fat accumulates in dangerous places in the liver around organs. Inflammation increases throughout the body. And the effects are not just physical. Research shows links between high sugar diets and depression, anxiety, addiction-like behaviors, because sugar activates the same reward pathways as drugs, the same dopamine release, the same craving for more. You are not imagining it when you feel you need sugar. Your brain has been trained to want it. Public health officials begin to take notice. The World Health Organization issues guidelines. recommends limiting added sugars to less than 10% of daily calories, ideally less than 5%. That is about 6 teaspoons per day. A single can of soda exceeds that. One bowl of many breakfast cereals exceeds that. Following the guidelines in the modern food environment is nearly impossible without carefully reading labels, without cooking from scratch, without opting out of the convenience that sugar provides. And most people cannot do that, do not have the time, the knowledge, the resources, so consumption remains high, and the health consequences mount. Diabetes alone affects hundreds of millions of people worldwide. The costs in suffering and in money are staggering. Healthcare systems strain under the burden, and still sugar flows. Some governments begin to act. They impose taxes on sugary drinks. They require clearer labeling. They restrict marketing to children. These measures help at the margins. Consumption drops slightly in places where they are implemented. But the food industry fights back. They reformulate products to just barely avoid the taxes. They create new marketing strategies. They lobby against further regulation. And they emphasize personal responsibility. It is your choice, they say, what you eat. The problem is not the product. It is the consumer. But this ignores the reality of addiction, of how sugar is added to countless foods without clear indication, of how it is engineered into products to maximize craving, of how the system is designed to make you consume more. The playing field is not level. And blaming individuals for a structural problem is a convenient way to avoid change. The modern paradox. Today, we live in a paradoxical world. We know more about nutrition than ever before. We understand the dangers of excessive sugar. We have access to information at our fingertips. And yet, sugar consumption remains high. In some countries, it is rising. Why? Part of the answer is economic. Sugar is still cheap. It makes food affordable. For families on tight budgets, sugary foods offer calories at low cost. A soda is cheaper than a bottle of water in some places. A bag of candy costs less than fresh fruit. If you are working multiple jobs, exhausted trying to feed your family, the easy option is often the sugary option. And that is by design. The food system has been optimized for profit, not health. And sugar is profitable. Part of the answer is cultural. Sugar is woven into our celebrations. Birthday cakes, holiday cookies, wedding cakes, candy at Halloween, hot chocolate on winter evenings. These traditions are not inherently bad. Occasional treats are part of a joyful life, but the boundary between occasional and constant has dissolved. Every day can be a celebration, every meal an opportunity for dessert. The culture of abundance, of treating yourself, of you deserve this, has been encouraged by decades of marketing. And it is hard to resist, especially when sugar provides real, if temporary, comfort. When life is stressful, when the world feels overwhelming, a sweet treat can be a small moment of pleasure, a brief escape, and we all need that sometimes. Part of the answer is biological. Humans evolved in environments where sugar was rare and valuable. Ripe fruit, honey, these were calorie-dense foods worth seeking out. So our brains are wired to crave them, to feel rewarded by them, to remember where we found them and go back. That worked when sugar was scarce. But now we live in an environment of abundance, of constant availability, and our ancient wiring has not caught up. We are still driven to seek sweetness, but now it is everywhere. In every store, every vending machine, every restaurant. Resisting takes effort, constant effort, and most people dealing with the demands of modern life do not have that effort to spare. So they consume, and the cycle continues. The alternative paths. Some people have opted out. They have removed sugar from their diets or drastically reduced it. They report feeling better, clearer, more energetic, less controlled by cravings. And science supports this. Reducing sugar can improve metabolic health, stabilize mood, aid weight loss. But it is not easy. Withdrawal symptoms are real. Headaches, irritability, fatigue. The first weeks can be miserable, and the social challenges are significant. Try to avoid sugar at a party, at a work event, at a family gathering. You will be offered sweets, pressured to indulge, made to feel like you are being difficult or joyless, because sugar is social. It is how we show love, how we celebrate, how we connect. Refusing it can feel like refusing connection. Industries have responded to health concerns with alternatives. Artificial sweeteners, stevia, monk fruit. These provide sweetness without the calories, without the blood sugar spike. And for some people, they help. They allow the enjoyment of sweet flavors without the metabolic consequences. But they are not without controversy. Some studies suggest that artificial sweeteners may still affect insulin response, that they may alter gut bacteria, that they may increase cravings for sweet foods. The evidence is mixed, the debate's ongoing, and many people simply do not like the taste. They find the aftertaste unpleasant, the sweetness artificial. So they return to sugar, or they consume both sweeteners in their coffee, sugar in their desserts, and end up with higher total sweetness exposure than before. The deeper question is whether we can change the system, whether we can create a food environment that supports health rather than undermines it. Some argue for stronger regulation, for taxes high enough to truly change behavior, for restrictions on marketing, for subsidies for fruits and vegetables instead of corn and sugar. These policies work in some places, but they are politically difficult. The food industry has enormous power, and many people resist what they see as government overreach, as interference in personal choice. The tension between individual freedom and public health is real and unresolved. And in the meantime, the status quo persists. Sugar remains cheap, available, and heavily consumed. The global spread. What began in the tropics, what was refined in Europe, what became embedded in Western diets, is now everywhere. Globalization has spread the sugar-rich Western diet to every corner of the world. As countries develop economically, as incomes rise, as Western fast food chains and soft drink companies expand, sugar consumption increases. In China, diabetes was rare a generation ago. Now it affects over 100 million people. In India, traditionally a land of spices and complex flavors, sugary drinks and snacks are becoming ubiquitous. In Latin America, Mexico has one of the highest rates of soda consumption in the world. And the health consequences follow. The rise of obesity, the surge in diabetes, the strain on healthcare systems that were not built to handle chronic diseases on this scale. This is not cultural evolution. This is cultural imperialism. Western food companies, seeking new markets as growth slows at home, aggressively market their products in developing countries. They sponsor local events. They advertise on every available surface. They price their products to undercut local foods. And they succeed because sugar is appealing, because Western products carry prestige, because in a globalized world, consuming the same brands as Americans or Europeans feels like participating in modernity. But the cost is borne locally, in increased disease, in lost productivity, in families struggling to afford insulin, in children who develop diabetes before they finish school. The sweet promise of development turns bitter. Some countries are fighting back. They are implementing the policies that richer nations have been slow to adopt. Mexico imposed a tax on sugary drinks and saw consumption drop. Chile requires warning labels on high-sugar foods and restricts marketing to children. Thailand has launched public health campaigns. These efforts show that change is possible, that governments can act in the interest of public health even against corporate opposition. But the forces arrayed against them are powerful. Trade agreements can be used to challenge public health measures. Companies can threaten to pull investment. And the promise of economic growth, of jobs, of development can make governments hesitate. The question is whether health will be prioritized over profit. The answer so far is inconsistent. The environmental cost. Sugar's impact is not only on human health. The environmental footprint is massive. Sugarcane plantations require enormous amounts of water. They degrade soil. They displace native ecosystems. The burning of fields before harvest, still practiced in many places, releases carbon and pollutes the air. The processing of sugar requires energy, mostly from burning bagasse, the fibrous remains of crushed cane, but also from fossil fuels. And the monoculture model, growing only cane across vast areas, reduces biodiversity. It creates landscapes that are biologically empty, green deserts where only one plant thrives and everything else is excluded. Beet sugar has its own problems. Beets are grown with intensive use of fertilizers and pesticides. The runoff contaminates water. The soil is depleted. And the processing, which involves multiple steps of washing, slicing, boiling, and refining, uses significant resources. Both cane and beet sugar contribute to the industrial agricultural system that is one of the major drivers of environmental degradation. And the scale is enormous. Sugar is one of the most widely grown crops on Earth. Millions of hectares devoted to it, all for a product that, in excess, harms those who consume it. There are alternatives being explored. Organic sugar production, regenerative agriculture that builds soil health, reduced tillage, crop rotation. These methods can reduce the environmental impact, but they are more expensive. They produce lower yields, and in a market driven by price, they struggle to compete. The cheap sugar that fills supermarket shelves is cheap partly because it externalizes costs. The environmental damage is not reflected in the price. The health consequences are not factored in. If the true cost of sugar were paid at the checkout, it would be far more expensive. And perhaps that would change consumption. But that is not how the system works. And so the environmental toll continues to mount. The psychology of sweetness. Why do we crave sugar so intensely? The answer lies deep in our neurology. Sugar activates the brain's reward center. It releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, motivation, and reward. When you eat something sweet, your brain lights up. It registers this as good, as worth repeating. This response made sense in evolutionary terms. Sweet foods in nature are generally safe and calorie-dense. Fruits, honey, these were valuable finds. Being motivated to seek them out helped survival. But in the modern world, where sweetness is not scarce but omnipresent, this system backfires. Your brain still treats sugar as a rare treasure, still rewards you for consuming it, still drives you to seek more, even when you have had enough, even when you know better. This creates a genuine form of addiction for some people. Not everyone, not in the same way as drugs, but the compulsive behavior is there. The inability to stop despite wanting to. The cravings that override intention. The use of sugar to self-medicate stress, sadness, boredom. Studies show that sugar can produce tolerance. You need more over time to get the same pleasure. Withdrawal symptoms when you cut back. Continued use despite negative consequences. These are the markers of addiction. And while the term is debated, the experience is real for many people. They feel controlled by their relationship with sugar, trapped in a cycle of craving and consumption and regret. And breaking free is difficult. Part of the challenge is that sugar is tied to memory and emotion. The birthday cakes of childhood, the cookies your grandmother made, the ice cream on a hot summer day. These memories are powerful. They are comfort. They are love. And when you eat sugar, you are not just eating a nutrient. You are accessing those feelings, recreating those moments. This emotional connection makes sugar harder to resist than many other foods. A piece of cake is not just calories. It is nostalgia. It is celebration. It is a small piece of happiness in a difficult world. And telling yourself or being told by others that you should not want that feels like being told to give up joy. So you do not. You reach for the sweetness, and the cycle perpetuates. The inequality of sugar. Sugar affects different populations differently. In wealthy countries, there is a paradox. The rich, who can afford any food, often consume less sugar. They buy organic produce. They hire personal trainers. They have time to cook elaborate meals from scratch. They can afford to opt out of the cheap, sugar-laden foods that dominate the mainstream food supply. Meanwhile, the poor consume more, not because they want to, not because they care less about health, but because their options are limited. Fast food is cheap and filling. Processed foods are shelf-stable and affordable. Fresh produce is expensive and spoils quickly. If you are working 2 jobs, exhausted, with limited resources, you buy what is accessible. What your children will eat, what does not require much preparation. And those foods are often loaded with sugar. This creates a health divide. Obesity and diabetes are now diseases of poverty in wealthy countries. The poorest neighborhoods have the highest rates, the worst health outcomes, the shortest life expectancies. And sugar is one of the mechanisms through which poverty translates into illness. This is not about personal responsibility or willpower. It is about structure, about what is available, what is affordable, what is marketed, what is normalized. And the solution is not to lecture people about making better choices. It is to change the environment, to make healthy food accessible and affordable, to regulate the industry, to invest in communities, but that requires political will and resources, and often those most affected have the least political power. Globally, the pattern is different but related. Sugar-related diseases are rising fastest in middle-income countries, places that are industrializing rapidly, where traditional diets are being replaced by Western-style processed foods, where the infrastructure for managing chronic disease is still limited. The people in these countries are caught in a transition. They are losing the protective elements of their traditional cultures, the diverse plant-based diets, the active lifestyles, the social structures, and they are gaining the harmful elements of industrial food systems. The result is a surge in preventable disease, and the burden falls most heavily on those least able to bear it. The urban poor, rural communities disconnected from their traditional food sources, women who often bear the responsibility of feeding families with insufficient resources, children who grow up in environments saturated with sugar and develop health problems young. The inequality is stark, and it is growing. The cultural resistance. Not everyone has surrendered to sugar. Around the world, there are cultures and communities that maintain different relationships with sweetness. In some traditional societies, sugar remains rare, a special occasion food, something for festivals and celebrations only. Daily meals are built around vegetables, grains, legumes, small amounts of meat or fish. Sweetness comes from fruit, from the natural sugars in vegetables, from the occasional drizzle of honey. These diets are not sugar-free, but they are sugar-modest, and the health outcomes often reflect that. Lower rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease. Not because these people are genetically different, but because their food environment supports health rather than undermining it. Some religious traditions maintain practices that limit sugar consumption, fasting periods, dietary restrictions, emphasis on moderation and self-control. These practices, developed long before modern nutritional science, often align with current health recommendations. They provide structure, community support, a framework for resisting the constant availability of tempting foods. And they work for many people, not perfectly, not for everyone, but they offer an alternative to the unrestrained consumption that characterizes much of modern life. They remind us that humans are capable of discipline, of delayed gratification, of saying no to immediate pleasure in service of longer-term well-being. It requires support, requires practice, but it is possible. There are also growing movements of people consciously rejecting sugar, not as a diet fad, not as a temporary fix, but as a lifestyle change. They educate themselves about nutrition. They read labels obsessively. They cook from whole ingredients. They find new ways to celebrate and connect that do not center on sweets. They form communities, online and in person, to share recipes and strategies and support. And they report profound changes, better energy, stable moods, weight loss, improved health markers, freedom from cravings. But they also acknowledge the difficulty, the constant effort required, the social awkwardness, the fact that they are swimming against the current, that the default environment is designed to make them fail, and so they must be intentional, vigilant, committed. It is possible to live differently, but it is not easy. The future of sweetness, what comes next? The trajectory is not predetermined. we could continue on the current path. Sugar consumption remaining high or increasing. Health consequences mounting. Inequality deepening. The food industry adapting just enough to deflect regulation but not enough to change outcomes. This is the path of least resistance. The path that requires no one powerful to change their behavior. And it is tragically plausible. Or we could shift, gradually or suddenly, driven by public health crises too severe to ignore, by lawsuits against food companies, by grassroots movements that change cultural norms, by technological innovations that provide sweetness without harm, by political leadership willing to prioritize health over corporate profit. History shows that major dietary shifts are possible. They happen, but they are never simple, never quick. They require multiple forces aligning. Some see hope in technology, in the development of better sugar alternatives, in precision fermentation that can produce sweet proteins, in genetic engineering of plants that produce sweeteners with better metabolic profiles, in apps and wearables that help people monitor their intake and make informed choices. Technology can help, but it is not a magic solution, because the problem is not just chemical. It is cultural, economic, political. You can invent the perfect sweetener, but if the food system still incentivizes adding it to everything, if marketing still targets children, if healthy food remains expensive and inaccessible, the fundamental problems persist. Technology is a tool, but it must be paired with structural change. Others see hope in education, in teaching children about nutrition from a young age, in empowering people with knowledge so they can make informed choices. Education matters, but it is not sufficient, because we already have unprecedented access to information. Anyone with a smartphone can learn about the dangers of excess sugar, and yet consumption remains high, because knowledge does not automatically change behavior. Not when the environment works against you. Not when the addictive properties of sugar override your intentions. Not when the healthier choice is more expensive, less convenient, less socially acceptable. Education must be part of the solution, but it cannot be the whole solution. It cannot be used as an excuse to avoid regulating the industry or changing the food environment. The most effective path forward likely involves multiple approaches. Regulation to reduce sugar in processed foods. Taxes to make sugary products less attractive. Subsidies to make fruits and vegetables more affordable. Restrictions on marketing, especially to children. Public health campaigns that change norms. Investment in community food systems. Support for people trying to change their diets. It requires action at every level. Individual, community, corporate, governmental. It requires acknowledging that this is not just about personal choice. It is about power, about who controls the food system and whose interests it serves. And changing that requires political will, requires people demanding better, requires seeing health as a right, not a commodity. It is possible. Other countries have made progress, but it requires collective action. And that is always the hardest thing, the wisdom of balance. Perhaps the answer is not complete abstinence, not treating sugar as a poison to be eliminated, but finding balance, moderation, a middle path, sugar in its place, as a treat, as a celebration, as an occasional pleasure rather than a constant companion. This was how it existed for most of human history, Rare, precious, special. And that rarity made it meaningful. The birthday cake was special because you only had cake on birthdays. The holiday cookies were a treat because you only made them once a year. The sweetness mattered because it was not always there. Perhaps we can return to that. Not to scarcity enforced by poverty or colonialism, but to mindful moderation, to choosing when and how we consume sweetness rather than passively accepting it in everything we eat. This requires a shift in perspective, from seeing sugar as an entitlement, as something you deserve unlimited access to seeing it as one pleasure among many. From using it as a constant emotional crutch to finding other sources of comfort and joy. From mindless consumption to conscious choice. It sounds simple. It is not. It requires unlearning patterns established in childhood. Resisting marketing that is sophisticated and pervasive. Changing social norms within your family and community. But it is achievable, and the rewards are real. Better health, yes, but also a different relationship with food. One that is less driven by craving, less compulsive, more intentional, where you eat not just because something is sweet, but because you are truly hungry, because you truly want it, because it serves you rather than enslaving you. Balance also means acknowledging nuance. Sugar is not equally harmful to everyone. A physically active teenager can metabolize sugar differently than a sedentary middle-aged adult. Someone with diabetes must be more careful than someone with healthy glucose regulation. Context matters. Individual variation matters. The goal is not to impose a single standard on everyone, but to give everyone the information and resources to make choices that support their health, and to create a food environment where the default option is healthy rather than harmful, where indulging is a choice, not an inevitability, where moderation is easy rather than requiring constant vigilance. We are far from that ideal, but it is worth striving for. The reckoning of memory. Sit with this history for a moment. Let it settle. Sugar, a simple molecule, a plant, a taste, has shaped the world. It has driven exploration and colonization. It has built fortunes and destroyed lives. It has been luxury and staple, medicine and poison. It has connected continents and divided people. It has sweetened life for billions while embittering the existence of millions who produced it. It is a story of human ingenuity and human cruelty, of pleasure and suffering inextricably linked. And that duality defines so much of human history. We create technologies, systems, products that bring genuine benefit, that make life easier, more enjoyable. But we fail to distribute those benefits justly. We fail to account for the costs. We allow some to profit enormously while others pay with their health, their freedom, their lives. Sugar is not unique in this. Coffee, chocolate, cotton, oil, countless commodities have similar histories. But sugar is perhaps the clearest example. The most direct line from pleasure to exploitation. The most literal bittersweet. An understanding that history matters, because the systems that produced it still exist. Slavery is abolished, but exploitation continues. Plantations remain, though the workers are now paid poorly. The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few companies, the prioritization of profit over health and environment, the manipulation of science and policy, these patterns persist. They manifest differently now, but the underlying dynamics are recognizable. And if we want a different future, we must understand the past, must reckon with it, must acknowledge what was done and commit to not repeating it. This is not about guilt. If you consume sugar, you are not personally responsible for the slave trade, but you are part of the system. We all are. And we have choices, limited but real, about how we participate. What we buy, what we demand, what we tolerate, what we fight for. Individual choices alone will not fix systemic problems. But collective action starts with individuals who see clearly, who refuse to accept the way things are simply because that is how they have always been. Sugar does not have to dominate our diets and damage our health. Food companies do not have to profit from making people sick. We can choose differently. We can build differently, but it requires seeing the full picture, the sweetness and the suffering, the pleasure and the price, and deciding what kind of world we want to live in. The quiet revolution. Change is already happening. Slowly, unevenly, but happening. Sugar consumption is declining in some wealthy countries. Not dramatically, but the trend is there. More people are reading labels, asking questions, seeking alternatives. Food companies are responding, reformulating products to reduce sugar, launching new lines that emphasize health. Not out of altruism, out of market pressure, because enough consumers are demanding it. This is not victory, but it is movement, and movement can build momentum. Each person who reduces their sugar intake makes it a little easier for the next. Each policy that restricts marketing or taxes sugary drinks shifts the norm slightly. Each study that clarifies the health impacts arms advocates with evidence. Change is possible. It is happening, but it needs to accelerate. The quiet revolution is being led not by governments or corporations, but by individuals and communities. The parents who stop buying sugary cereals, the schools that remove soda machines, the community gardens that make fresh produce accessible, the doctors who talk frankly with patients about sugar and health, the researchers who continue studying despite industry pressure, the activists who organize for policy change, the journalists who investigate and expose. These people are not famous. They are not powerful in the traditional sense. But together they are shifting culture. They are creating space for different choices, different norms, different futures, and their work matters. Because large-scale change always begins with small-scale actions. With people deciding that the status quo is not acceptable, that there must be a better way, and then working persistently to create it. You are part of this, whether you realize it or not. Your choices, your voice, your actions, they ripple outward. They influence others. They contribute to the cultural environment. And in a culture where so much feels beyond individual control, this is empowering. You cannot fix the food system alone, but you can make choices that align with your values. You can support policies that prioritize health. You can share knowledge. You can model different ways of living. And collectively, millions of people doing this creates change. Not overnight, not perfectly, but real change nonetheless. The question is not whether you can solve the problem. It is whether you will contribute to the solution, in whatever small way is available to you, because that is how transformation happens, not through grand gestures, through countless small acts of intention and care, the sweet mercy of rest. You have traveled far tonight, From the sugarcane fields of ancient New Guinea to the industrial food system of today. From the first sweet taste to the global health crisis. From slavery to the science of addiction. It is a heavy history, a bittersweet story in every sense. And now, as you settle into stillness, as your breathing deepens and your muscles release, let the weight of it rest. You do not need to carry it all. You do not need to solve it tonight. The problems are real. The suffering is real. But so is your need for rest, for peace, for the small sweetness of a quiet moment. And that is not indulgence. It is necessity, because you cannot care for the world if you do not care for yourself. You cannot fight for change if you are exhausted. Rest is not escape. It is preparation. It is the foundation of all that comes next. So breathe. Let the story settle like sediment. Let it inform you without overwhelming you. Know that sugar's history is complex, that its presence in your life is the result of centuries of choices made by countless people, that you are both inheritor and agent, both shaped by the system and capable of shaping it. But not tonight. Tonight you rest. You let your mind drift. You release the grip of consciousness and allow sleep to come. And in that sleep, something integrates. Some understanding deepens. Not consciously, not obviously, but in the quiet work of the resting mind, connections form. Clarity emerges. And tomorrow, whenever tomorrow comes, you will wake different. Slightly, subtly, but different. Carrying the knowledge, ready in whatever small way to choose more wisely, to live more intentionally, to contribute to a world where sweetness is not built on bitterness, where pleasure does not require suffering, where the harvest is shared justly and the land is tended with care. The sugarcane sways in fields you will never see. The crystals dissolve in cups around the world. The systems turn. The history accumulates. But you right now are still, are quiet, are drifting into sleep. And that is enough. That is everything. Because rest is resistance. Peace is power. And the sweetness of this moment, this breath, this release, costs nothing and harms no one. It is pure. It is yours. It is the taste of simply being alive, without needing more, without needing anything. Just this, just now, just the gentle descent into dreams, where the past is memory and the future is unwritten and the present is soft as breath. Sleep now. The world will wait. And when you wake, you will meet it, changed, ready, whole.